Football won, folks. Football won. And you couldn't feel happier about it. Maybe if it's a people say, well, it's PSG. Yeah, you're right. Okay. But at the end of the day, they played great football. Football won because their footballing proposition was so proactive, because their desire drove them forward. They were the team that put every single argument on the table, and they were able to win, and able to win in convincing manner. Why else would you, I can't see anyone complaining. You can spin it to say, well, Inter played a horrible game, which they did. I mean, but in part, it's because of how PSG proposed this match from the onset. The pressure that was being made. They couldn't handle the fluidity of motion and the fluidity of movement and the movement relationship of movement between one player and the other for PSG. You saw the number 4 playing as a number 9. You saw the number 6 playing as a number 8. You saw the number 9 playing as a 10, or even out wide, and even sometimes as a fullback, coming out wide and trying to overlap as well. So there were a lot of things that Inter weren't even able to realize. I mentioned it on Sportsmax saying, look, Inter, when they get dragged out of position or dragged out of shape, they end up being very vulnerable. And today they were absolutely dragged out of shape and absolutely sliced and diced. They were completely, just surgically dismantled by PSG. There was no other way to put it. And one of the big talking points leading up to this match was, well, who's going to exploit whose spaces, because that was also Inter's biggest strength, apparently. Well, it was, because that's how they got to this final, the way they attacked. But let's keep in mind that if they thought that PSG was going to present themselves the same way Barcelona did, well, they were in for a huge reality check, and reality check they had. That's for sure. There was no doubt about that, because the way that they played against, or the way that PSG positions themselves, do they pressure? Yes, they absolutely do. But they're very calculated. They understand the spacing that's required to be able to pressure, to not leave your back, vulnerable or suspect to a counterattack. They understood that very well, and they were able to basically cancel out the midfield, the central midfielders. I mean, Mkhitaryan, Çalhanoğlu, Nicolo Barella. Basically the most important thing that Barella was able to do is, after the 34th, 35th minute, he starts to mark Vitinha. Too little too late at that point. So when all that ends up going on, all that ends up developing, well, everything else starts falling into place. The pressure that was being established, winning balls in certain sectors, pushing Inter back. That all ended up being one thing leading to another, and then to another. And that is where things end up really falling apart for Inter. They didn't have a response. They wanted to play out of the back. They couldn't. There was nobody to play the ball out of the back with. So I had to deep ball one again. Trying to send that ball in the middle, intercepted. That's where all of these things end up falling apart for Inter as the game went on. And obviously the constant movement. You'd see Doué down the right, and where'd he come from? Di Marco was having a nightmare trying to cover him, trying to cover Dembélé whenever he's in that sector. If not, Dembélé was running out of the left. Carabasquelia was also coming through, and it ends up leaving, or at least giving you the impression that PSG played with 16. I mean, you can put it on. So it looked like they were playing with 16 at one point, because wave after wave, players running from the left to the right, from the right to the left, down the middle, just being able to establish all sorts of numerical superiority where they needed to and had to, and Inter just did not have a response. Inter was just shifting and coming back and shifting and coming back, and all of a sudden when that shift was made, they timed it well, where all of a sudden there was space on the other end, and they're scrambling back to be able to compensate for that space that was occupied or wasn't being occupied. And that's where things ended up falling apart, and shots that were being created. The first goal was just beautiful. Understanding when to send the through ball, and standing when lines could be broken. And just Inter had no response at all. There was no reply. There was nothing they could do that could end up. They did have a moment where momentum was in their favor. They had PSG cornered, but you never had that sense that PSG felt rushed or they were scrambling and fighting for their lives. No, they were composed. You saw them clearing the ball out. Okay, fine, they come back, no problem. Let's reset. Let's readjust. We'll have it. We'll have ours. And they did have theirs in the form of a counterattack, which was what they're waiting for. Which saying, okay, well, we'll wait for the proper time to break out. When we end up scoring, things will settle down. And score they did, and settle down it did. So there's really nothing else to say. I mean, you have to feel good for what you've seen, because it starts to see that Luis Enrique is bringing in yet another tendency of vertical football, of no longer having to send quick passes, sending quick passes, but forward. Sending deep balls, but with purpose. Sending balls with pace, but also with a good angle and good anticipation and good timing. A lot of those things are to be mentioned. Will Ousmane Dembele win the Ballon d'Or? Probably at this point. He has one of the best cases, if not the best case, to win the Ballon d'Or at this point. We shall see. Which ends up being incredible, knowing just a few years ago that he was one of the major scapegoats for Barcelona being eliminated at Anfield. And this ends up leading me to another aspect of this all. In Doué's goal, if I remember, Doué's goal, the 2-0. He ends up getting the ball. The Dembélé of 3, of 4, 6, even going back to the Borussia Dortmund days, he would have shot that ball. He would have tried to turn around, and even if it was a defender, he'd try and bang it off a defender. He'd try to do that. This Dembélé is a different one. He's kind of reincarnated. He's kind of grown into what Luis Enrique has been able to see in him. A very dependable player, a very healthy player, a player that ends up being just so dominant when he's able to get that ball. Turns around, composed, calm, has vision, sees the player out wide. Doué's right there, 2-0. Of course, he also ends up being vital in the third goal. Him and Vitinha hooking up, and then finally Doué with the 3-0. So there's that. Gigi Donnarumma didn't have a lot of... He had a couple of saves. People were kind of scratching off the bingo card as the match went on. Okay, what's going to happen now? Oh, guys, well, so-and-so has to score a goal. Now, that was it. He ends up being one of that ended up scoring, and well-deserved, as he's, I guess, the only player that's going to be winning 2 league titles this year, because, of course, he played with Napoli the first half. Donnarumma was the scapegoat on many occasions in previous years. Just remember that PSG getting eliminated with Messi, with Mbappe, with Neymar against Real Madrid. And many went immediately to Gigi Donnarumma. I did. I sure as hell did. This Champions League, he got it. He deserved it. He won it. He's a huge reason why they're there. If not, you should have seen the match at Anfield. If not, just seen some of the saves that he made against Arsenal. If you had a doubt. Some of the saves he made in the early stage, in the league stage, and what he was able to do. He's a major reason why they got there. And this is his crowning achievement. Maybe even more than winning the Euros with Italy. Maybe. A lot of players, Marquinhos, who so many times off failure after failure after failure after failure after failure. As the captain, he raises that trophy. For him, it must be a huge weight lifted off of him. I could say, yeah, PSG, if they didn't win it for them, it's a great achievement. No, it's not. Because they always have that, this is their measuring stick. This was always their measuring stick. This was the tournament with which they measure themselves, and now they're amongst the all-time greats. And maybe I'm getting carried away. Maybe I am, because I'm getting carried away with the moment. Maybe they could be the one that's ushering us into a new age of football. Maybe. We shall see. Because with young players, now experienced, now winners, and now knowing that they have to continue this line of thought, this line of believing, this mindset that they've been established, it's been established by Luis Enrique. For them, they know that this is the way forward. If they didn't know it then, they sure as hell know it now. If they needed any confirmation, or if they needed this to be the confirmation. We'll see. But the future and the present seem very bright over in Paris. Talk to you guys soon. Ciao.